Hey folks, welcome to Project Gamma. At Project Gamma, we have smart conversations with smart people focused across the topics of entrepreneurship, cybersecurity, and technology. My name's Warner Moore. I'm a technologist and security leader who has helped build multiple business-to-business software as a service companies over the years, and I'm passionate about modern cybersecurity practices. I'm also the founder of Gamma Force. At Gamma Force, we help tech and health tech companies with cybersecurity strategy through fractional executive services and execution as your fractional security organization. I'm excited today to have Jason Montgomery here with us. Jason is a serial entrepreneur and technologist with deep cybersecurity expertise. Jason started as a technologist young and started working with tech professionally during the early days of the internet. After serving as a security professional in corporate, he joined the startup world by co-founding AI company Nexosis. Fun fact, that was 10 years ago. Nexosis was founded in 2015. After founding Nexosis, Jason founded another one, Mantium, an early GenAI company. Now Jason's serving as an independent consultant and a technical trainer with Rincon. His focus now is, again, in cybersecurity and Gen AI. I'm really excited for our conversation today. The intersection of entrepreneurship, AI, and cybersecurity is really a unique opportunity. So, Jason, you were on the short list of folks doing AI before AI was a super cool thing to do. With your 10-year perspective, how do you see AI affecting our use of technology today?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think I see it well with the generative AI boom right now. I think we're seeing it touch pretty much everything. I think machine learning early on when we got started was what we were focused on, and it had limited uses, still very powerful and had good use cases, but was a little harder to roll out and implement, especially for just anyone. Now that we have large language models and things you can interact with in natural language, it becomes a lot easier for anyone.
With the LLMs and things like that, it hit me recently where being in tech a long time, like yourself, I may be a bit desensitized to buzzwords and I move on past things pretty quickly. Mentally, it's like, oh yeah, this tech thing we've been doing forever, this new thing, evolution of it, right? Because we see how the evolution occurs being deep in it. And having been involved in technology since the early days of the internet, like yourself, I mean, the internet was a major shift. I remember the first time I saw a URL on a billboard, it blew my mind. I'm like, whoa, this
Yeah.
nerdy thing, a website, and there it's on a billboard. Um, and I feel like Gen AI is another one of those paradigm shifts, and we're still in that irrational exuberance phase or the hype bell curve, the
Oh yeah.
innovation bell curve. But I don't I I see it as changing the way we use technology fundamentally. But what's interesting is the shift right now, in a lot of ways, we're using it to augment the things we've been doing a long time. And I'm not sure where that line is, but I do know that there's some really neat stuff happening. And with your consulting work, I understand you're building AI agents to help with engineering to drive down technical debt. What are your lessons from that project so far?
Yeah, I think as an accelerator of work we do as a it's a big multiplier. I've been, like I said, I've been using generative AI for about 4 years now. And in the early days, it was sort of a fun toy. Still trying to figure out a workflow around it, how it works. It was neat to chat with something that seemed like a real person. But it wasn't until probably a couple years in where we started to see AI getting access to tools and agents, or really just putting different prompts behind different services. and different LLMs, so you could actually have them either converse with each other or enhance your work. And now I can't imagine doing a lot of my work without it because it is such an accelerator. It's also completely ridiculous in some contexts. The outputs can be complete garbage to really insightful and incredible. And so you really have to have that sort of human steering overlaying it. And so as far as using it, one of my proof of concepts, and I've played with tools like Cursor and Windsurf from Codium, and I wanted to understand what is this, what is the real capability here with these tools? How much is it going to accelerate my work? And so I did a couple different projects. One was I want to lay down all the foundations of a good CI/CD system and all the sort of skeleton parts of like an API service with the front end, and I wanted to use those tools to write a lot of the code. And it started out with a lot of copy and pasting, and I prefer Claude and Sonnet 3.5. The coding output I get there is high quality, but I've used ChatGPT a lot for that too. And it was a great accelerator. I think it took me a few days to do something that normally would have taken me about a month. And I was like, this is huge. And then you move to tools like Windsurf and the other one, and it's like you spend a lot less time because it's actually overlaying diffs on your code. And so you can approve line by line what it's added. You can have a conversation about an architectural design feature you want to add. But the problem with the LLMs behind a lot of these things is they have all the information. They have all the bad design patterns and all the good ones.
Mhm.
So the real skill, and that's why you need to have and know good engineering principles first. And same with cybersecurity. When you're trying to have it help you, you can't just talk to it like another person and assume it knows everything. You have to elicit those weights in the model to sort of bring out the things of value by setting really good system prompt or a prompt in your system so that it really brings out the right things. And so what I would find sometimes without good context, it would write the most juvenile sort of silly thing. And it's like, okay, that's not going to work in production ever. Like, please stop. And so, and I like to talk to my AI systems with sort of that, please stop,
You
and
don't say please and thank you.
I do actually. I talk to it somewhat like I do another person, but then I also talk down to it not like I would talk to other people because it's a little easier to, and I'm not going to actually elicit an emotional response, and it just makes me feel a little better when it's doing something ridiculous, and I'm like, please stop. And so the other one I wanted to do was I wanted it to write the entire framework for a video game in a framework I'd never used in a language I'd never used.
Hmm.
The first one I did in Python. I've done a ton of Python over the last 10 years. And so I kind of knew where I was going. And that I proved that out really well. I started in just copy and paste with Anthropic's Claude, but then I switched over to Windsurf, and it was even more accelerated at that point. And then with the video game, I was like, well, I'm going to do this in Lua, and I'm going to use a gaming framework I've never used, and I don't know anything about this, but I'm going to apply engineering principles in my conversation and in my prompts. And those systems actually allow you to put um, in their context files, they have these system files you can set up that set up the architecture of the system, your design patterns, your tool chain. So if I have a foundational class system, I can point to that file. I can tell it I'm using dependency injection. I can, talk about how the unit testing is going to work and how the integration testing is going to work. And in about 3 days, I had the skeleton of a video game. It had the main menu screen. It had settings, options. I had a logging system. I had performance monitoring, and just a ton of like the skeleton in about 3 days. And I didn't write any of the code. In having coded in about 5 different languages over the last 30 years, you can read code well enough. That doesn't mean I can write it or understand the best practice patterns in a language. But a lot of my prompts focused around eliciting high quality code in those frameworks. I've now also been doing that in other languages like Node and React, and now I'm using it all the time, and um, it's incredibly helpful. But what I do see people reviewing these systems, like on YouTube, they're like, let's use whatever to write some code. They'll pull in a random repo they've never seen, and they'll just like type a simple sentence and they'll just smash accept on everything. And they're like, well, it fixed my bug or it didn't. And I'm like, that is literally the opposite of how you should use any of these systems. So like reviewing a product from that standpoint, I find disingenuous and not actually giving it, it's not a self-running system. You have to help it along the way and course correct it constantly.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I've seen a lot of hyperbole around this subject, in extreme variations, right? Engineer colleagues who just want to completely discount it. The YouTube example you provided, it's like, oh, it didn't do this thing to a high professional standard when the way the tool was used could have been refined. And then on the other extreme, I know CTOs who are just jamming out early stage product and well, they represent it to a high quality and maybe relative to a cheap custom software prototype, probably beating that by a high standard, but that doesn't take much. And I, like me, I have trouble making the distinction, like how good are these tools at this? And that's why I really love what you shared before, that really practical experience. So for somebody who doesn't have a strong position but wants to take these tools in their engineering organization, and maybe a CTO introduce it to their organization, how would you encourage them to do that? I expect you a perspective that's way better than just use GitHub Copilot or whatever, right?
Yeah, I think one, people have to understand what it is, and how it works. So that's kind of going back to the principles. And I don't mean like you need to study how the LLM architecture is and how it elicits weights and how the embeddings work to that like data science degree. I mean, as an engineer building a system, or as someone technical who's going to engage with it, I think you need to understand what it's good at, what it's made for, what its limitations are, how to prompt it properly, how to have it critique itself, which is limited also. And so I think in understanding how then these agentic systems are architected, I'm seeing tons of people just put engineers on a project. And I read about these articles where they're like, engineers are having a hard time or developers are having a hard time integrating it into their products. And it's like, well, they don't have the engineering foundations necessarily. I don't know that they're learning some of the important sort of foundations of the data science sort of at the high level, and then the deep engineering principles applied to that, as well as the security controls. So if you're just throwing simple prompts at it, you're probably not going to get a good result. And then so if you have like a customer support chat you want to integrate into your platform and you don't have an evaluation framework that has an entire data set of known good and known bad that you can actually test empirically how your model's performing, you're going to have a really hard time. Well, let's say we're going to upgrade our model. Is it going to work better or worse? Well, I don't know. Anecdotally, you could tell after 3 or 4 tries, or OpenAI said it was the best thing, or Claude said it was the best thing, or DeepSeek said it was the best thing, or it's better at whatever. And it's like, sometimes you don't need a large language model. Sometimes you need maybe a compressed model that's lighter weight to solve a classification task. And then that can be used in one of the agents. And then another agent needs to use something that's better at interacting with a person and knows that sort of reasoning and chain of thought understanding of their models. And by sort of understanding the different models, their use cases, their sizes, where they're appropriate, and how to then attach tools without too much agency. How do you put the guardrails around the system? And then how do you measure that it's going to work going forward? A lot of people complain the quality went down as OpenAI added more and more controls around it. And it did a bit, I think. But then I think you just needed to adapt your approach. Same with Claude. I see sometimes it has to switch to concise mode because there's too many users and they need to reserve some of the compute. So they'll switch it from a more elaborate sort of dialogue to a more concise response. And that causes issues with large files. So if I want to edit a really large file, you're going to find a chunk missing in the middle that it forgot about. And so if you're not reviewing the results consistently, whether that's a documentation file or a presentation you're writing or a document or a piece of code, you're going to run into those kind of problems. So there's, I think, going back to understand how it all works, what are the controls you need in place, I think goes a long way from then just like chatting with the system, which I think is how some people are rolling it out. And other people, they're hiring the right people and they have the right talent. And you see their tools really work really well. And then you go to other systems and they're kind of like, it's a neat card trick, but it's not like, okay, it wrote Flappy Bird, but can it write a production system that's secure and, whatever? And I would argue it probably can't at this point without that sort of overlay and guidance, or without a lot of good sort of structural foundational pieces underneath it that it's deriving information from to generate good production code.
I really like the concepts of DevOps culture and practices. And one of the ways I distill that quickly is cross-functional teams with shared purpose. So thinking of a modern engineering team, a cross-functional team, where you wanted this team to fully embrace these practices in the most effective way as possible for what the tools are capable of today. What would that team look like? What roles? How would you help them be successful?
DevOps team in particular, like that cross-functional product team.
Yes, cross-functional
Yeah.
product team, not just focused on infrastructure and operations.
Got it. And you mean that DevOps in general, or you mean with a generative AI focus, or?
More product. So think modern engineering product cross-functional team, but with the goal of fully adopting current Gen AI technologies for the engineering work being done.
Got it. Yeah, I think as far as who you have on the team, I think it's everybody involved, right? You've got your designers, you've got your cloud engineers, you've got your, developers, full
So
stack or
just
front.
for example, I
Yeah,
typically have like systems, test, all engineers, right? Systems, test, software, and then you have process and/or business people, and roles differ depending on the organization. But
sure.
let's just say a scrum master, product owner, whatever, business person. Um, and then there's different, like security engineers, a luxury. I always want security
It is
engineering
at a startup.
skills in the team, but having a full-time dedicated security engineer in the team is a
Uh-huh.
luxury. Most don't have that. But so full engineering skill set represented.
Okay.
Um, and now think of that cross-functional team. Would it be different roles or would it be specific skill sets to introduce those Gen AI practices for engineering?
I see. Yeah, I think you would I think you do the foundational training. You say, here's how the system works, here's how to evaluate the models you might want to use.
Training
And
the model, not the people.
no. I would want to train the people on how to use
Got
the
it. Got it.
model. Yeah. So we're focused on if you're a product manager and you're writing tickets, how do you best help it with your task?
So it's you're not even thinking like write a new job description and make sure the right person is hired. You're just thinking retool existing team members. And that's the
You have to. Yeah. You're not going to find specialists in AI right now. There's too many people, everybody wants it. So everyone needs to sort of retool and relearn. And so I would recommend everyone go learn the fundamentals, and what the limitations are and how to elicit the weights in the to output the right sort of documents or code or whatever you need it to
yeah,
do
because prompt
for your
engineering
role.
is a skill, right?
Yeah.
It's
And I don't know it's a full-time job. That's also a luxury. I think they've made it a job at some companies. That's nice. I think for most of us, we need to learn how to prompt.
mm,
Um, and there's tons of resources on how to prompt. And then you take those skills and then you apply them to your job. And then you learn about systems like, well, we have all this data in our company that talks about how we build our systems or how our product works. How do I get that into the prompt, right? And so you have to learn about retrieval systems. How do I do retrieval? And it's like, well, are you gonna just copy and paste stuff in? Do you want to have a more formal system where you've generated embeddings and or you fine tune your model? And it's like, well, there's all these trade-offs. And so I think Usually you start small, you understand the basics, you understand the systems, and then and a lot of the tools everyone's using are suddenly getting flooded with AI features also. So if I'm
Mhm.
writing a product ticket, in Jira or whatever, I'm going to end up with AI tools right in there that are going to help me. Or if I'm in Notion in a wiki, or if I'm in my developer tool, my IDE, I'm going to end up with a chat window there and so it's like you're going to be prompting everything all the time. And then they're building retrieval in automatically. So you don't have to go do the embeddings. You don't have to learn how to have the system go build an agent that retrieves stuff about your company. I would say probably see what AI features are in the tools you're using. If it costs $5 more a month, it might be worth trying that out per user or whatever and seeing how that works. But again, they're going to build the retrieval. So if you've got a bunch of product tickets in there, they're going to be able to pull that data in and reference it and sort of do things in a similar style as you're trying to do and understanding the background of the company. Um, like when I'm coding, a lot of the times I'll have the tool generate the documentation for the developers to use, but then I use that and I have it go get that file to then write another file for me based on the documentation it wrote. And so there's sort of like building out documentation is actually now reasonable. I think that's the one thing that goes out the window at startups is no one has time to write good developer docs. As soon as they're good, they're old, right?
Mhm.
What I'm finding is it can update them sort of as you're evolving your system, and I'm able to do that. And it's like, okay, we just made some changes to the dependency injection system, for instance. Please update the docs on that with what we just did, or like review it, critique it, and then modify it. And so I'll end up having more living documents. I'm not having to write documentation. I hate it. Every developer usually does. And I don't have to write that now, but I have to go read it to make sure it didn't put something wrong in there, right? So you still have to evaluate the output. And so it's really like, how do you use the tools we have today, or should we buy new tooling? A lot of the stuff's really inexpensive. I think the Selenium and Windsurf tools, I think, 15, $20 a month. Um, I think Copilot's free now, and that there's a reason. It's because I think they need to build something more sophisticated. I don't find that greatly accelerates. It saves me some hassle writing a function or something to solve for something, but I like the things that can do much more broad sweeping changes, especially if you're trying to rip out some technical debt and replace it with something else, and you have to update 20 to 30 files with the references to the new thing. It actually is pretty good at that. It's got tools, it's got access to grep, it's got access to the search tool in the IDE. And so it'll go and find all the places. You have to be careful and you have to talk it through and you have to evaluate it, and constantly check the work. But um, it makes a lot of that work me more directing it than me doing the busy work. So it's kind of having a really um, I don't know, a decked out assistant that kind of knows a lot of everything, whether it's design principles, engineering principles, code, like whatever.
A really good co-op that
Yeah.
might have had some great, great home or personal
Yeah.
projects, but not quite the professional experience.
Right. It's kind of like pair coding, but you have to understand that it may not be always operating at the level that you want it to be. So you kind of have to correct it but it is like pair coding, and it's like I used to have to go bug people when I was writing code, and they wrote another part of the system. And I was like, now how do I need to interface with you? I don't quite understand. The docs aren't up to date. I read your code. It looks crazy. And then I would always be bothered by bothering them. Now I can just ask the LLM in my IDE, what's the best way to interface with this? And what can you explain it in plain English if I don't understand? And it does all that. And it really saves that interrupt time because you don't want to interrupt other people's flow. And so it's really helpful with that too.
Well, what you've helped me realize talking through this is I I think foundational principles and knowledge are more important. So, computer science, right?
Yes.
Uh, I I've always said some of the best engineers I've worked with really understand the foundation, right? And no one knows everything,
Nope.
but if somebody has an ops background, they might be the sort of person who read RFCs, right? The documents that define the protocols that we use every day, right?
Yeah.
understanding how websites or HTTP works and the transport protocols, layers 5 and under. Those things can be really important in some cases. And understanding how
Yep.
algorithms work, what sorting mechanism you might want to use if it picks some really inefficient sorting mechanism. So really having those that the science understanding of how technology works is more important using these tools than ever.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you got to be able to spot bad output. And if you can't, you're going to be in trouble because yeah, it'll go off and do something really naive. It'll work, but like you're going to find out later that you've got real problems in your code base if you didn't really vet the and so yeah, it's back to fundamentals, making sure you understand that, and then how to prompt properly to sort of output that. And I think it would accelerate anyone's pipeline if you understand what it's good at and what it's not, and how to interact with it for effective use.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited to hear later about how your AI agent experiment goes with the tech debt project. I think that use case is really intriguing. I'm going to shift gears now, though. We've been talking a lot about Gen AI, but I don't want to end our conversation today without exploring some of your cybersecurity expertise. And one of the things I think is particularly interesting is how you not only have deep cybersecurity expertise, but you understand how to apply that in modern technology organizations, right? If we're a traditional industry, decades old company, we might be dealing with old paradigms, right? Our flat networks where we're trying to solve all these security problems with band-aids. Whereas a young modern company, well, do we even have a network? And I say that
Yeah, 100%.
fully meaning it,
That's
right?
right.
What's your playbook for security in a modern company?
Yeah, it's tough. It's kind of it's education. Again, I always start with that. I like teaching, and so that's part of it. But I also think like, you have to make sure people know what the risks are, right? And how to avoid them. And that's just sort of, that's sort of the general security education for everybody. And I think understanding how it applies in a role-based context for what their job involves, whether it's coding or, in HR or whatever. And for that, it's a lot of we don't use a lot of tools because there are a lot of them are expensive that unless they're open source. And so we spend a lot of time on I want to get the right tools like in a CI/CD pipeline. That's really important. Make sure we have third-party vulnerability scanning, some static analysis tools, some linters, things that check for good practices and patterns, coding standards, sort of all that stuff. And that's kind of foundational in a pipeline. So that's more developer centric because that's kind of where I live. And then for the rest of the org, it's making sure that, we use a password vault. We buy that for the company. You use it. You don't share stuff anywhere else in Slack or otherwise. You share it through your password management tool. We have vaults with permissions. And if you can keep your passwords and API keys protected, so don't put your developer keys, like 1Password has a CLI, it's got an API, it's got nice tooling, and you can dynamically, before you spin up a container, drop all the variables dynamically into it.
About
Or
10 years ago, I had a team build a vault.
yeah, you probably had to 10
Before
years
we
ago.
had vaults, right? And
Yeah.
we have so many good choices for vaults
Oh
now.
yeah,
It's a
it's great.
solid problem. It's a
It's
luxury, right?
it is, and it's not that expensive. And so that was one of the other things we do. And so it's like keep all that stuff out of the repos, keep it out of your developer environments because developers are just pulling gobs of like code from the internet and running it locally, like all day, all the time. And the thing I've found with a lot of the generative AI tools, and I hope they've evolved out of this pattern, but it came from using notebooks, the data science notebooks. You would invoke some sort of library, and it would just go download it dynamically. And so we're spinning up containers in our test environment, And suddenly it downloads the entire NVIDIA package in CUDA and it's installing it in the live container. And I'm like, these aren't immutable. And so now we don't know what we have in production because it just dynamically, because we didn't understand the technology, and there's ways to pin the right versions and have it preloaded and cached so you don't have to dynamically add it. But a lot of the tools in this is a couple years ago, in the generative AI and data science tools would just like download everything in the kitchen sink that the developer touched. And so you don't have any of the scanning eyes on that. You don't know what your risk is with that. And then having that stuff in your developer environments, it's the Wild West. Even if you're in a disciplined environment at an enterprise, we're still running mostly open source code these days. And so I think we have to be aware that we don't want any of the secrets on our systems until we need them at the last minute, and then they should go away once that system is off. We have CLI tools that check for them in your shell. So like, I forget the name of the tool I use, but it'll warn me anytime I have a secret in my shell or in my environment. And then you run a command and it clears them all out. That's handy tool to have. So I'm always looking for quick wins like that. It's like, how do we just protect our secrets? Don't respond to phishing and spear phishing because that's constant. Someone always wants gift cards for the CEO at a small company. And we always laugh about it because you're sitting across from him, you get a text message. I'm in a meeting and I need a gift card. And you're like, no, you're not. But it's kind of a lot of the fundamentals there, and then just making sure you have good patterns. Some of that takes a little bit of time and planning to set up front, but I think we never, in both companies, I don't think we ever had any really major incidents at all, just because we tried to keep people educated and we tried to have good hygiene kind of up front. And we were small and we weren't a target, so there's that. And once you become a target, things get a lot harder. But yeah, I think it's just, yeah, those are the main things I can think of.
Yeah, and I've worked with so many different tech companies over the years, and meaningful incidents I have few examples of them, right? And we have incidents. If we have an incident response
Sure.
process, we test it, we follow up, we follow the
Yeah,
process.
that's
That's
right.
normal. But
Totally.
an actual compromised environment that had a major business impact kind of incident, those are rare in my world.
Same.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like the stuff, the FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the things we're worried about, and the media headlines for security. Well, ransomware, right? I,
Yeah.
I I remember I was helping build a large health tech company at the time. Another big ransomware attack hit the industry, and then I'm having to talk to the board and everyone about ransomware for a month. And
Yeah.
the I had to work on my messaging because when I told folks it didn't apply to us, that message didn't land because they didn't believe it. It didn't sound real. But
Yeah.
when we don't have flat networks and our entire business operations on servers and technologies in a building, it's like, well, ransomware might lock out a workstation, but that's not going to have meaningful business impact.
Yeah.
Our stuff is in the cloud, right?
The biggest problem I saw there, just to add a little bit of something I did see that didn't turn into a major incident, thankfully, but it was an issue, was um, creating a flat network with your cloud environment and VPNing into that. We had one of those crypto miners that gets into Kubernetes.
Mm.
Saw that happen on some test networks. And we just shut them off, thankfully. But and it didn't spread because we did have some isolation. But the fact that the guy in the house got it and he had a flat network and it hit the other test cubes network and like just kind of spread through, you got to really think about, because yeah, we were mostly remote. It was kind of a zero trust model, but the VPN setup in the office was basically a shared network with the cloud VNet, and that was like a really bad pattern.
Mm.
You have to be careful, I think, in those instances where you sort of create a flat network with your cloud environment, and then you can run into problems with that. But I only saw that was the only sort of area where you can make a flat network with your cloud environment if you're not careful. So
That,
be
that
careful.
brings back some memories. I was early stage insurtech company, and we're starting to scale. And I was building out some of the technology and security team, and well, one of the first security engineers I hired, exceptional engineer. Love this guy. Would I hire him again? But lots of experience, and I we were zero trust. We treated our office as a coffee shop. It's internet access. That's it. Who cares?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And he kept on wanting to build VPNs to our AWS
Yeah.
production environment.
We'll want
And
to
I'm
do
like,
that.
dude, don't. I had to
We
pull
know.
it back so
Yeah.
many times. And he finally got it. If he didn't, I probably wouldn't want to hire him today. But
Yeah. The
we
other
don't want to
tool,
do that stuff anymore.
no,
It's a
you
bad
don't.
move.
That reminds me, we did have some of the sophisticated endpoint security on everybody's laptop, and we did have a zero trust VPN tool that had dynamic policies and profiles that you could roll out to a dev, which was different than if I needed to pivot into as a cloud operations person managing production. It was very different for them, and they were always very careful with how they did that. And we never had those VPN connections like that. Often we'd use the Bastion host or something a little more gapped in a way that kept things a little harder to screw up accidentally. And so that was really helpful to have that sort of zero trust dynamic VPN setup as opposed to just a flat, wide open tunnel that just let all the traffic back and forth. It was sort of role purpose built and only was in test environments and development environments.
And if we're using modern paradigms anyway, the convenience of having the VPN, it doesn't make sense. It's an old pattern, right? We've moved past
It
that.
is. Yeah. Yeah. And it comes up a lot. And I've had to challenge those ideas too. And it's like, well, we just need to, and even customers are like, well, let's peer our VPNs so we can have access to your system. And it's like, I don't want the liability of your enterprise VPN on my cloud network. No, thank you. And that's just a bad pattern because my stuff's going to get on you and your stuff's going to get on me. So how about we just find another solution instead of a tunnel or VPN or some sort of peering solution?
Yeah, one of the things I appreciate about working with modern companies is that we're not trying to apply band-aids to problems we know how to solve, but in the environment we're in, they're difficult to solve because the organization can't change or has too much history in a tech stack that a bunch of business is supported by it.
Right.
Um, Organizations running end of life technology. It's just these things are not sophisticated from a security perspective. We know what to do, we just can't do it. So in modern companies where we can do the right thing from the start, it turns into how do we protect the things we want to protect the most? And our default standard for security is just so much higher.
Yeah.
The fact that we're doing automation in SDLC as opposed to figuring out how to do an automated deployment at all, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, for sure. The new challenge though is with the generative AI tools, and you see people doing these push button app builds, is like they don't have any of the usually of the security pieces at all. So I'm always worried about this next wave of apps coming out where people are just jamming them out the door, and they're really prototypes. I wouldn't call them production, grade at all. I do worry about that.
Yeah, yeah. I remember, well, like infrastructure and ops folks have always been the part of the technology profession where there is often a deeper and broader understand of the technologies we were using. So there was a lot of value in that in complex technology environments, understanding how things work comprehensively.
Yeah.
And as we've abstracted more and more, when we started having like Helm scripts and orchestration scripts where
Right.
folks can download entire technology stacks and just run scripts to build out a production platform, I started interviewing young people who were focused on technology operations but didn't know the fundamentals or even care about it.
Right.
And that became enough of a trend. We have that part of the technology profession where there's not as broad or deep knowledge anymore. And I think that's something as technologists in general, we need to be sensitive to,
Hmm.
because with our complex systems, as we abstract them more and automate them, well, that's great. We should do that, but we can't be ignorant of them.
Right.
And Gen AI is same thing. If we abstract it out and delegate the critical thinking to our tool set, we'll get in situations that we can't respond well to.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. You get stuck for sure.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation, Jason. I appreciate your time today. Do you have something I like to ask all our guests is if they have any books they recommend, any top of list books they'd like to
Sure.
recommend to the audience, and if you have any closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's a few books. I think if you're not super into the generative AI wave yet, if you're still learning, I think starting real simple, and or if you want to recommend books to your people who are less technical, I think Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mullick is really good for everybody. That's like a I recommend that book for anybody who wants to get into generative AI. And then I did read the Coming Wave by Mustafa, and he's ex Google and whatnot. It was a little doom and gloom, but I think it was a good thought exercise for me because there's a lot of concern. And then I would balance that book with a book called AI Snake Oil, which is kind of a debunking the AI hype book. And I think one sort of is like good for general business, and AI Snake Oil might be good for everybody too. Those were probably the top two. And the Coming Wave, I think, was interesting as well if you're worried about some of the where society could go with overuse of AI and technology. And then if you want to get real technical, there's a applied LLMs.org. This team spent a long time building generative AI systems a couple years ago. I think they published this in June of last year, 2024. And it's called What We've Learned from a Year of Building with LLMs. And it's super tactical, operational, and strategic ways of integrating LLMs into your system. It talks about eval frameworks, retrieval systems, and whatnot. So I think, and then finally, I'd wrap that off with the OWASP LLM top 10, just to
Right.
understand some of the security threats. That's kind of that's my list of stuff I think that people should be aware of.
Awesome. Well, a great conversation today, Jason.
Yeah, thanks.
I want to thank you all for listening to Project Gamma presented by GammaForce.io. And check us out on your favorite podcast platform to catch future episodes. Take care.